Would, would,
So
Joe, would it be fair to say that they're going after Ghislaine Maxwell on like far lesser charges just to throw the public a bone over the whole Epstein story?
you see that's a good question. I think that ties into what steps they had to do to circumvent that sweetheart deal that was given to Jeffrey.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that
So they couldn't go after him for certain things because they did this deal beforehand and those things were off the table. So they're kind of forced to go for smaller charges, is what you're saying.
that that's what my take has been on this so far. I'm gonna leave that subject to my further research on this because I've become very curious about the charges and trying to lay this out for the public as to what the charges are, the difference between charge one, charge two, charge three, whether and spelling this out. And that's actually part of a project I'm working on the next like 2 to 3 days while we have this break here, where I sort of want to walk the public through why it is that we have these charges, no other charges, whether or not she can be found guilty of the same charge, this
Mm-hmm.
same acts for like two different charges, and why it is that the judge ignored prostitution as a potential basis to convict her with
Yeah.
respect to Kate. With the older girls, when I say older, 17, 16, as opposed to,
What
15.
was she involved with these big players that people are talking about that went to this island? Was she
She was
involved
on
in that
flights.
stuff or
She was on flights with Clinton. She was on
right?
flights. She was on flights with. There was actually a picture of her getting on a plane with Bill Clinton.
But
She was.
she was also said I believe during the trial that she was some sort of personal assistant for Mac for is that just nonsense?
That's true. That's
Okay.
true. She was.
Hmm.
The first testimony that came out from the first pilot who came up with the
Well,
very first
I'm
question
only
asked to him.
saying I'm only saying because like if you're a personal assistant, maybe you tell your personal assistant, "Hey, I'm flying with the president to the island." Like she knows about it because she's a personal assistant.
No. She was
Okay,
described by the pilots as being number two directly underneath Epstein.
right.
She was also dating him in the early to mid 90s. They found hundreds of pictures of them canoodling in ways that
Hmm.
they looked like lovers. They were sharing a room together.
Hmm.
She and everything, and she also was very instrumental in finding these girls and making the idea of coming to Jeffrey's house palatable to
Hmm.
very young girls, and then teaching them how to like please him. It was just she was so intimately involved with everything here that, as I said earlier, there's no way to believe that he could have accomplished all this without considerable help from her. And think about this: if you were there,
Hmm.
there's a documentary. I don't know if you watch any documentaries about this story, but there was one, Filthy Rich, which was focusing on Jeffrey Epstein, and there's a guy who worked in creating the communications tower, fixing it on the island, and he said, when someone asked him about it, some guy who worked the pools or he knew asked him about working there, he's like, "Look, I'm doing it for the paycheck. That's why I'm here." And the guy said, "What would you? How would you feel if it was your daughter who you saw out there?" Because he said he saw on the island really young girls walking around no clothes by the pool,
Mhm.
and he became, and that's when he sort of turned and he quit his job. And the point which I was trying to bring out to you is, I mean, what kind of person sees this sick monster doing this to all these young girls and doesn't report it? But
Yeah.
Right.
instead of not reporting it, actually tries to bend over backwards helping them. That's why I say that she's as bad as he is. There's something wrong with you. You're sick and you're just completely screwed up in the head. If you don't go running to the police, say, Jesus, these 14-year-old girls are being thrust into a massage to basically, wank this old dude who's giving them $100 a pop. It's sickening. It's
Hmm.
disgusting. And that she didn't have that reaction, but rather went the exact opposite direction. It's mind boggling. It's really mind boggling.
Right. And it's even worse because, as you said, like there's this idea that some women would have, like, oh, she's a woman, she's gonna protect my daughter, she's not gonna allow some deviant sexual predator to do anything to her because she's a woman. And it's like, no, she's basically like, the top bitch who's just getting all these innocent girls for
Yeah,
this
and
scheme.
it's unclear whether she did it for money or for love, because
Sure.
she ended up she obviously was being paid the whole time that she was there. In 1990, she had a relationship with him at some point. Then she got a bonus payment seemingly of like $18.3 million in 1999, then another $5 million, then another $7.4 million, which was spent on a helicopter, which no one knows a total of up to $30 million in bonuses for her work in his employ. And the government's theory that they're trying to push is that she was motivated by money to do all of this. So, but who cares what her motivation is? She's still a bitch.
Yeah, who cares?
Could be both.
Yeah.
Is she going to be convicted?
It's a good question.
Okay,
really
so
question.
How's the trial going? So the prosecution just rested, right?
Yeah, they just rested Friday afternoon. And what I'll tell you is I think she's going to be convicted only because I think the jury sees that morally she's culpable. And a lot of these cases, legally, it's far dicier whether she's culpable. But from she's at a stage where it's like the jury, if they love her, have every reason to say there's reasonable doubt here and let her go. And if they hate her, they have every reason to hang her. And from what I've heard from those who have been inside the jury room, because I speak to people during the breaks and stuff like that, the jury despises the defense counsel. Like when they get up there and they're cross-examining these women, like half the juries are sitting there with their arms folded. Yeah, they're sitting with their arms folded, just shaking their head at the attorney and like looking like staring darts at them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that should be reassuring, that this is a jury that's looking to convict rather than looking to let her go.
Yeah, I mean, you have all these girls on stand who are talking about their sexual abuse, and the defense is trying to make them look, like they're liars or something.
Yeah, and to be fair, they've told their stories over multiple times, and whether it's because of time or because of drugs, which all of them have engaged in heavy drug use at one point or another, or alcohol, or the defense will have you believe because they're lying and fitting their stories in, and changing their stories all the time. They've told the stories to the FBI. They've told the stories over when they filed when they filed for the Victims Claim Fund that was set up for victims of Jeffrey Epstein in 2019. Some of them have sued Jeffrey Epstein and or Sarah Kellen, who was another right-hand woman of Jeffrey Epstein. So many of them talked to the press about the stories, or they got up there in 2019 after Epstein died. Berman allowed women to come up and talk. So they've told their stories over many times, and when you tell your story over many times, frequently there's slight differences here and there, or it's taken down a little bit differently by the FBI agent. And the defense has relentlessly tried pinpointing, like, well, you're saying today that Virginia Roberts drove you to Jeffrey Epstein's house, but you said 2019 that it was Tony who was driving. Which is it? And just to try and make them look like, and I'm sitting there thinking, who gives the slightest damn? So she's mistaken about like that small thing. But like, or they'll say, in interrogatories, when you were asked if anyone other than Jeffrey Epstein ever touched you or physically assaulted you, you said no. And today in the stand, you said that she was rubbing your chest. So, and that's something that, that's a little bit more compelling. So the question is, if they want to disbelieve these women, there's plenty of grounds to disbelieve them. And this question is, where the jury feels emotionally about this. So,
I mean, with the Epstein stuff was so public, and then his quote unquote suicide was so, everyone talked about it. Like it's hard for me to imagine that they could find a jury that would be neutral approaching this case.
Yeah, totally. I can't imagine being the jury sitting there and listening to this. Is so fucking repulsive to me that I would just be like, and tortured the whole time.
Put this person away forever.
I would, exactly. I'd be like, hang her. Let's get out of here early. What do we have to see all this nonsense for?
Yeah.
Throw her ass in jail.
When I heard the first victim testify, and she was testifying for like, an hour, I'm an hour into listening to this on like day 2 of the trial. And I just looked at the journalist next to me. I was like, this is the most awful thing I've ever had to listen to in my life. This is terrible. This is just so brutal listening to this crap. And how they're just being led down the path, and where it ends. And it's almost like if you've seen like a horror movie, you're like, don't go in the house.
Yeah,
don't go in the
totally.
house. and and they're like, so I figured if that she's gonna help me, and that that this would just stop, and this is a one-time thing. And it's like 15 years later, she's like, okay, that's it, we're really through now. And you're like, what the hell? Like, you spent your whole life servicing this asshole.
Yeah.
Whatever. It's very and then Carolyn, I just want to point this out. Here's an interesting thing that I noticed during this trial that I never really thought about before. And that is when Carolyn was telling her story, and she has the most contradictions from one story to another. What made her incredibly credible to me was that she was crying at weird points. Meaning, to me, and a lot of people believe Jane when she started crying. Like, everyone I spoke to really believed Jane when she started crying, even though she's a soap opera star, and was asked on cross-examination, are you able to cry on command? And she's like, well, not always. But a lot of people believe Jane. Everyone but me, honestly. Me, I was like, it seems a little too perfect. But what sold it for me on Carolyn is when they were talking to her about what she did, she wasn't crying. She wasn't breaking down. When she was asked, what did you do with the money? And she started breaking down saying, I bought more drugs. And I was like, that's a weird place to cry. But then I was like, no, she's basically has all this regret about the choices she's made in her life.
Yeah.
And that was just, to me, that's when I was sold that, this woman has basically been abused by every person she's ever been around. And it's an awful life.